The Maracana is a special place. Built in the 1950s to host the World Cup, it was a stadium the likes of which the world had never seen. There are people who still believe that the bad spirits still stalk the corridors to remind us of a day the nation of Brazil would rather forget. 220,000 spectators, many of whom had entered illegally to witness the 1950 World Cup final, which became known as the Tragedy of the Maracana. The world was in ruins, and Europe was suffering from the aftermath of World War II. FIFA was keen to resurrect the World Cup as the competition had not taken place since 1938. No country wanted to host the tournament until Brazil stepped up to present a bid in 1946. They offered to host the tournament on the condition that it takes place in 1950, instead of the originally proposed year of 1949. Brazil and Germany had been the front runners to host the cancelled 1942 World Cup, and since the previous two World Cups were held in Italy and France, a South American country was preferred. Brazil's bid was similar to their bid in 1942. Brazil proposed a new playing format to maximise ticket sales, as stadiums and infrastructure were costly, and each participating team would be granted at least 3 matches. This would in turn be an incentive for the European countries to travel to South America and compete. After a 12-year hiatus, the FIFA World Cup would finally return for its 4th edition in 1950 Brazil. The aftermath of the World War led to many teams withdrawing from the tournament, with only 13 teams participating, who were divided into 4 groups, where the winner of each group would advance to the final group stage, where the winner would be decided in a round-robin format, making it only time the tournament would not be decided by a one-off final. Brazil comfortably advanced to the final round, having won 2 out of the 3 group matches. They thrashed Mexico 4-0, Yugoslavia 2-0, and drew against Switzerland, with Ademir Marquez unleashing his prowess for Brazil with 3 goals. Whereas their South American counterpart Uruguay, who were making their first appearance in the competition since winning the inaugural tournament in 1930 in their own backyard, crushed Bolivia 8-0 in their sole group match. Brazil, Spain, Sweden and Uruguay then competed in the final round. Brazil convincingly won their 2 matches, thrashing Sweden 7-1 and Spain 6-1, as once again Ademir shone for Brazil by scoring a total of 5 goals in 2 matches, and Brazil led the points table with 4 points. Meanwhile, Brazil's neighbours Uruguay overcame the European teams and were placed second on the points table with 3 points. And on the 16th of July 1950, at the infamous Maracana Stadium, the 2 South American teams met for a decisive match, with Brazil needing to avoid defeat and Uruguay needing to win to become world champions. Brazil was riding high, having scored 23 goals, and star striker Ademir had already scored 8, while their goalkeeper Marco Barbosa had an impressive record of conceding only 4 goals in 5 matches. The nation was so confident that the local media and politicians declared the victory even before the match had begun.
I remember standing in the queue for tickets. They were selling newspapers with the headline "Brazil are world champions." They were convinced it would happen.
The mayor of Rio, Anglo Mendes de Moraes, delivered a speech that said, "You, players who in less than a few hours will be hailed as champions by millions of your compatriots, you who have no rivals in the entire hemisphere, you who will overcome any competitor, you who I already salute as victors, heartiest congratulations." 22 gold medals were made, with each player's name engraved on them. A victory song of Brasil Os Vencedores, the Brazil the Victors, was composed and practised, ready to be played after the final. Brazil were the hosts. They were practically already celebrating the World Cup win, or at least their fans were. Uruguayans were the underdogs, and as the Brazilian team stepped out onto the field in their white shirts with blue collars, the Uruguayans stepped out in their infamous Celeste shirts. One of Uruguay's most experienced campaigners, Varela, calmed his team down in the tunnel, saying, "Walk out there calmly and don't look up. The game is played on the pitch, so never look at the stands." But the game began as expected, with Brazil attacking against the Uruguayan defence, who held their nerve to keep the scoreline 0-0 at half-time. But thanks to a controversial goal from Sao Paulo forward Fraqueira, Brazil scored first to break the deadlock, just 2 minutes after the interval. The Brazil fans were jubilant. Celebrations had already started as the team went 1-0 up against Uruguay. The Maracana was reverberating with samba chants. Brazil played an unconventional WM formation, one they hadn't used much until the World Cup. It was an offensive gamble, a gamble that would prove to be their undoing. In the 66th minute, Varela exposed Brazil's system and found Giga. He had got the better of Bioge and crossed the ball into the box, where an on-rushing Juan Alberto Scafino took the shot first time and blasted it into the roof of the net, sending the entire Maracana into a nervous anticipation. Although Brazil was still on course to lift the trophy, with a little over 20 minutes left to play, fear and doubt started to grip the crowd, as the noise slowly started to ebb away. The momentum was with Uruguay, and in the 79th minute, Giga, with some neat interplay with Perez, struck a hopeful shot towards the near post. Barbosa dived to his left to save it, but missed, and just like that, Uruguay were 2-1 up, as the Brazilians watched their South American counterpart celebrate their second world title. The 1950 World Cup became the most embarrassing moment for Brazil, as they missed out on their first ever World Cup title. The fans across the country committed suicide following the defeat. Reports suggest that local newspapers and fans refused to accept the defeat. The Brazil goalkeeper was deemed the culprit of what would have been the greatest celebration in the history of sport for conceding a pair of goals in the gap of 13 minutes. Under Brazilian law, the maximum sentence is 30 years, but my imprisonment has been for 50 years, Barbosa said in the 1990s. Uruguayan players and fans still taunt Brazil for this humiliation. The entire nation of Brazil fell into a state of depression, mostly attributed to the fact that Brazil wrote itself off as world champions even before kicking the ball. The defeat was so telling that the Brazil team did not participate in any international matches for 2 years, nor did they play at the Maracana for 4 years following the World Cup. Losing to Uruguay in the 1950s not only impacted Brazilian football, it impacted the country's self-esteem, said Aldo Rebalo, the Brazil Minister of Sport. On the same day in the town of Três Corações, Brazil, a 10-year-old guy, Edson Arnates do Nascimento, saw his dad crying too much while they heard the match on the radio. He then promised to his father that one day he would win the World Cup. And just 8 years after the 1950 final, he would win the World Cup, as he promised to win it and go on to win 2 more. That guy was none other than Pelé.